Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Discussing a Murder. This is Jeff Jones, and I'd like to introduce the panel today, starting at the top with Kelly. How you doing, Kelly?
Hello, everyone. I'm very well. Thanks for having me back.
And Big Jeff.
Hey, Jeff, thanks for inviting me back too. It's good to be here. We're getting right into the thick of things now, so it's getting more and more exciting. So looking forward to going through this with you.
Absolutely hitting it hard now. And Dr. Silkman.
Good morning, everyone, from lovely South Australia. Thank you so much, and welcome, panel. It's great to be here.
Without any, last week we were talking about Brendan Dassey a lot, and so we'll start where we left off. And this is Pete Bates, Dean and Jerry's investigator, talking about Brendan Dassey's false confession.
In one position or another for the last 40 years. I have never, ever witnessed a search like was done in this case. You don't just obtain a warrant and that gives you the property for as long as you want. It's the most unprofessional mess I've ever seen. They took over that property for lengths of time that gave the opportunity for evidence to be fooled around with. Jesus, you don't go into a place and search it 18 times and keep looking for something unless the only reason you go in a second time is because you believe you missed it the first time. Once a place is cleared, it's normally released back to the person.
I think because I heard him say warrant, maybe it's a good time just to quickly echo uh, the new stuff that has we can enter in this discussion. What a lot of foul play have already done this, but let's just echo a little bit and touch base just to bring it over here and match it into where we are in this episode for what we know now. Um, we clearly have him saying the warrant. There's never why to get this warrant. You're going in, you're checking, and then you're going back. Usually, you go in and then you hand the property back to the owner until further notice. So, warrant. Do we want to address the warrant, Dr. Sookman? Being the fact that your team have touched based on this, but I just thought this would be good just to again. This the whole idea of discussing a murderer was to add what we know now. We're at a part where we're hearing about a warrant. Um, the timeline of the warrant. He says this really interesting thing that you don't go back unless you're expecting to find something. And when we go back to the timeline, we now can start seeing that with the things that are coming out with Cuss Road and things like that. They're searching for things and they don't find the key, and then they finally find the key on the 8th. But what came before the 8th? Well, Cuss Road now comes before the 8th, which is on the 7th. So you wonder whether or not that all now ties in. Again, so Dr. Silkman, because your team has covered a lot of this, I thought maybe we could just put a bit of groundwork in this part as well. Thoughts?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, at the same time, I'm also doing a series, Reading with Uncle Ken, where I'm looking at various chapters and going through what Ken Kratz has written in his book. And at the moment, we're doing chapter 15. Chapter 15 is specifically about Kathleen Zellner and what her experts have found. And at the moment, we're on the part regarding the bones, which is extremely very interesting because some of our members from Foul Play through the use of FOIAs were able to get access. Now, wait for this. They were able to get access to search warrants that were in draft form, right? So these weren't actually warrants that were executed. They were draft forms of warrants. And what is remarkable about these warrants was that they let it basically slip about the clandestine burial site at Cuss Road, But also the thing which is blew my mind is the fact that they mention a blunt object in the back of Teresa Halbach's RAV4 with blood on it, right? And the question is, what blunt object with blood on it, right? No one's ever seen it. No one's seen any photographs of it. No one's seen any mention of it. So it's remarkable. What is more important here, guys, is what is not presented rather than what is presented in front of a judge. And those draft warrants are very, very interesting indeed. And Kelly's correct. Everything seemed to happen after November the 7th. And November the 7th, of course, is famous or infamous for the events at Cuss Road. But it now, if you look very closely at these draft search warrants, there were definitely some funny business going on at Cuss Road, including, of course, dog hits by both cadaver dogs and scent dogs, which I wasn't really well aware about, and the fact that the earth had been disturbed at that clandestine burial site. So there's more to this story than what we've been told.
The key was worthless as far as I was concerned as evidence because of the number of searches. Now, this is a key that was used by her for several years, and they took the key and meticulously scrubbed it for DNA. And that was, at first glance, a good thing. But they came up and represented that the only DNA found on that key was Stephen Avery's. That is patently ridiculous. Any crevices, anything else in that key would have retained her DNA. And for them to be able to say only Stephen's DNA is on this indicates to me that that key was scrubbed clean and his DNA was placed on it.
Really important point that here, Dr. Silkman, are you ready to take this one?
Yeah, I'm sure everybody else in the panel will add their own comments. But this is this is a common theme, guys, that we see throughout this case, and that is we have all these incredible Pam of God moments. I call them Pam of God moments, where whereby the searchers go inside Stephen Avery's trailer, I think up to 7 times. They really find nothing of significance. The crime scene crew have gone through it using various lights, etc., looking for blood, DNA, body secretions. They can't find anything. And out pops this key, right? And as Kelly alluded to in the last episode, it's very important because you're now placing an item, a personal item belonging to the victim inside the suspect's trailer. So in a way, you now have a direct connection between Stephen and Teresa Halbach, right? But again, the common theme is this. Correct me if I'm wrong, guys, but you never find a mixture of any type of DNA anywhere or bloods anywhere. You find discrete sources of blood or DNA. And this is remarkable. This is a key, and have a look at it. It's got a fob on it as well, a cloth fob, which is going to be very absorbent. So if you're holding this key, potentially you can get oils, skin cells, fingerprints all over that key. And yet, what does Cherie Culhane find? A pure source of genomic DNA belonging only to Stephen Avery. Now, come on, guys. This is very, very suspicious. In fact, so suspicious that Mr. Kratz and Big Jeff will tell you he wanted to step away from that key because he knew it looked really, really bad.
Yeah, we're going to get to the point where in the trial he says, even if you think the key is planted, right? Well, if I think the key is planted, if they plant one thing, you're good Manitowoc police officers. Why wouldn't they plant other stuff too? I mean, just if one thing is planted, the whole thing's out the window. And the key above all things, how did you get a hold of the key in the first place? If you had the key, doesn't that mean you're probably the one that moved the car? Just saying, how'd you get your hands on the key? Where
That's
was
right.
it? Yeah, where was it that you actually got it to plant in the first place if you had it? Follow that trail backwards. To me, it leads to very nefarious conclusions. Whoever planted the key is the one that moved the car.
That's right, because you actually need the key to drive the RAV4 onto the property in the first place. And then, and it's so ridiculous because we know that Stephen actually didn't need a key at all. If he had committed this crime, he needed an end loader to put in the RAV4 into the crusher. You don't need a key, right? So, and also, why would Stephen conveniently leave behind the lanyard and only take the key? So, he obviously is a very thoughtful killer, separating the key from the lanyard and leaving the lanyard in the RAV4 and taking the key with him. Again, it makes very, very little sense.
Making, in addition to that, Dr. Silkman, making the effort to remove the other keys, from the ring, which are the house key and the office key, which you can see quite plainly in that picture that you referenced before for that Tom Pierce took at the park. You can see those other keys. And where are they? So he took the time to take off the other keys, but left the lanyard and just left the key the laying around in his own bedroom. For what reason, we don't know.
100% correct. And there's also another issue with that photograph taken by Tom Pierce, and that is if that's a fairly recent picture, as in a few days before Teresa disappeared, then there's another issue. Not only is she holding a bunch of keys, but the blinker light is in perfect working condition, right? So if you look at the front of her RAV4, it's fine. There's nothing wrong with that blinker light. So within a very short time frame, something happened to her house key, the key to get into her office, and also the RAV4, right? So it's something totally bizarre took place to her RAV4 and her keys. Now, if you're thinking that Stephen Avery had burnt the keys, then why are the rivets of the Jean Survivor a big whopping fire, right? They're metal, right? And they allegedly were found in the burn pit. But where are the keys? Where's her expensive camera, right? So there are items which are missing. I don't believe anyone has found them. Kelly, have you got any thoughts?
I was just going to kind of backtrack a little bit and throw in a bit of a devil's advocate play around with this. So the key, I'm confident in saying that I believe it was planted by the law enforcement. That's my opinion. I know you all have your own. Everyone respects everyone's opinion, but let's just consider, do any of us consider the fact that maybe the killer planted it in Stephen's trailer? Is that a possibility? Does anyone think that at any stage that could have been, that means that we're taking it away from law enforcement, and that the killer, when they entered the trailer, because you got to remember, if we're following Kathleen's version, the killer was in the trailer getting the blood from the sink. So maybe they dropped it at the same time. Again, we're just playing around with the narrative here, a theory, but I just wanted to know, does anyone here consider it was the killer?
No.
Jeff Jones?
I tend to agree with the other two guys simply because of the no, I'll just leave it at that.
Okay, so the reason why I do not believe it as well, I don't think it was the killer. The reason why I do have to consider like it may be a possibility is because when you go back, I work from logic and I go backwards from that. I go, okay, then. So if the killer didn't do it, how did law enforcement get the key? And I think you all just said it as well. Whoever had the key must have had access to the RAV. If you had access to the RAV, you most likely bought the RAV back to the salvage yard. So the problem that I have with that is, Well, look, not really the problem, but I personally don't think they found the RAV. How do I say this? I don't think Andy Colburn was calling in the RAV plates while he was looking at the RAV. I no longer believe that. Could they have found it elsewhere at another time and done and had it come in? Absolutely. I just don't think that moment was captured for being the moment. But now I'm wondering, there's two alternatives now. One, they did get into the RAV on the salvage yard under the tarps, and they had the key there. So they grabbed the key from that moment, and then they gave the illusion that it was locked. The problem with that is, why would they hold on to a key and not just file it as evidence there on the spot? It doesn't matter that the key's there. It's on the property. It goes into all these spirals. And the next one that I think now is, could have been found with Cuss Road. Could it have been buried in this, plastic bag that they found? And the reason why the key is so clean is because maybe it had like dirt and soil and crap from it that they absolutely cleaned it up because it had debris of all these other elements from the Cuss Road. And that's where they were finding it. Because you got to remember, Cuss comes first. Well, really, RAV gets found first, Cuss comes next, and then the key gets found. So we've now got two alternative narratives of how that key was found. I just wanted to make sure that you guys were all on the same page, that, you believed it was law enforcement, because if you did believe it was a killer that put the key there, I just thought it would be an opportunity to kind of explore that. But I think we're all on the same page there.
Yeah, I think the reason is because it's just so not believable that the key survived so many searches of that place is so small, given the number of hours that they spent searching it, including, I think, one of the searches that was before, and we can listen to Mr. Kratz's horse shit, and I know, I feel terrible for Dr. Silk, but he probably read that book 3 times now. It's poisoning your mind, so be careful. Be careful of what you're doing to yourself by reading that book over and over again. But he likes to say, oh, well, the searches were for different things. You write a search warrant for a different thing. You go and you collect that stuff, and you don't really go looking for other stuff. I mean, that's the kind of the message that he tries to send around that, right? Which is why it's very interesting to get the draft search warrants, because you can kind of tell they have these things ready, because it's not just one omnibus search warrant that lets you do the whole thing. When you start going for specific things, you have to write up exactly what you're looking for. I think the Wisconsin State the crime lab was in there searching the carpet for fibers, right? That's one of the things that happened prior to one of the 7 searches that they allude to in the man. And they're crawling around on the carpet and they're looking around the back. You never know if you're looking for for DNA for this horrific murder that happened in the bedroom. That could have happened, but you're searching everywhere. That's why to me it's not believable. Now, Lincoln Coburn's search warrant that they went in was to search for pornography, because all of a sudden the presence of pornography in the bedroom is a reason why they can show his or evidence of that they can show his sexual deviancy of the type of pornography they might find. And of course, rather than, I think they pulled some pornography out of that bookcase, but guess what else manages to emerge during that? So it's just, to me, the reason why I just don't think that the killer planted it, he would have had to have done it, the 3rd or perhaps the 4th, while Stephen was not there, that he probably wasn't available to do it, and it would have had to survive all the searches, and that's what's the most not believable part of all.
Well, 100% correct. I mean, sort of like they give the excuse, and I remember this vividly during the trial. Strang and Buting were basically asking, how come you're going in there for so many times in the trailer? And they justified it by saying, well, the initial searches, we were looking for a body. Right. So so in other words, they went inside the trailer, they were looking for the presence of Teresa Horbach or her belongings, and they clearly didn't find anything. So that way they kept on justifying going back in, seizing the computer, seizing pornographic images, etc., etc. So they kept on justifying that. But don't forget that the crime scene crew went in there as well, right? And they literally stripped the place. They tore off the paneling from the bedroom. And Big Jeff is correct. They even ripped up part of the carpet, because even if you use a carpet cleaner to clean up blood or wherever, a lot of the blood can actually soak through to the bottom of the carpet. So what they do is they rip up the carpet and check underneath to see if anything is soaked through. So quite clearly, they found no presence of blood. They found no presence of fibers. In fact, they found no forensic evidence of Teresa Halbach ever being in that bedroom. So that's very, very frustrating if you're trying to build up a narrative that Teresa Halbach was restrained to the bed, right? So what's the next best thing that they do? All right. So forensically, they can't prove anything took place. So now they drop an item belonging to the victim inside the suspect's bedroom. That's classic, what I call enhancing the evidence, right? So you want to make sure that Stephen Avery's bedroom is not that clean, that there's nothing belonging to Teresa Halbach. Out of the blue, you have that key. And the key is very problematic because there's no evidence of any fingerprints, there's no evidence of any blood, and there's no evidence of any DNA belonging to the owner of that key on the key. It's way, way too clean.
You took a lot of what I was going to say out of my mouth again there, Dr. Silkman. I was going to make the point that there's no blood on that key. So in this scenario of rape, torture, murder, dragging a body out, according to the prosecution and their evidence, he's bleeding. He's actively bleeding. He's bleeding in the Grand Dam. He's bleeding in the RAV4. There's all this blood floating around. Yet, no blood on the key. And I just find that to be a stretch. And, you know, I think Big Jeff calls them, what is it, man miracles, Big Jeff?
Yes, man miracles. And I have them numbered, too.
Which number is this? 3 or 4?
It's got to be number 3, because one is number 2 is item 2 is FL, 1 is the RAV.
Right on. And so I also wanted to make the point that we should count about how many officers were actually searching prior to this key being found, because basically he's calling them all horrible searchers, you know, by finding this so far down the line. And Lincoln Colburn magically find it. So everybody that searched the place before them are complete buffoons to miss this such important piece of evidence. Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, Jeff. Sorry for interrupting. But keep in mind, that's the reason why they had to have Lincoln, Colburn, and Remiker, who are all part of the MTSO, because apparently they were search technicians, right? And so remember, they were stretched for resources. And if that's the case, tell me, what are all those people doing at Cuss Road if they were stretched for resources? How come they're there for most of the day and the night time if they're desperately looking for Teresa Halbach, right? They weren't looking for Teresa Halbach anymore, right? That they were finding evidence that confirmed and proved that she was deceased.
Good point.
I have a question for the panel, and by the time this gets aired, we'll all be sitting in the chat. So anyone, please feel free to give me what you guys think. But thing that I find really bizarre about the key, though, Kathleen has said numerous times that she believes that the key was planted by law enforcement. It was actually one of their first stages of planting the key, because it was at that moment that they thought the killer had brought the RAV on, the killer had put the blood in the RAV, the killer had put the bones there. The law enforcement were then convinced that it was Stephen Avery who had done it. So they saw an opportunity to do another connection, and they did the key. That kind of is a bit not the word hypocritical, but it kind of contradicts itself, because if they really thought that it was Stephen Avery, why then would they have wiped down the key in fear of finding anyone else's DNA on it if they believe Stephen's DNA should already just be on it because he's the killer. So why would they then, if they really believe Stephen done it, why would they go to the effort of cleaning it completely up just to add just Stephen's on it when they were so already convinced that he was the killer? You wouldn't need to tamper with it any further than that. The only thing I can think of is possibly they were trying to eliminate themselves. But then in saying that, I think, but then they could have got away with it because they could have went, well, we found the key accidentally, we got contaminated in between that. The searching, I must have touched it. So why did they have to wipe that key? And that's why I consider maybe that's why I considered Cuss Road was significant to this timeline, because if it was found in a compromising situation, being in soil or any kind of element that shouldn't be there, they had to clean it off. And then while they cleaned it off, they're like, shit, now we have to add back onto it because now it's too clean. Again, that's just a thought of mine. But my question is, if they really believed that Stephen had killed her, why would they clean it if they really thought that he should already just be on it and just leave it in its natural form?
Well, that's a really good question. The thing is, though, right, unless you know whose DNA or potential DNA or DNAs are on that key, you're completely clueless, right? So therefore, you run the risk. Say that key is found elsewhere and they photograph it in situ, right? They clearly haven't got that. The only time we see that key is inside Stephen Avery's trailer. So if that key is found off the salvage yard, just say it was found at Cuss Road, or even in the RAV4, there's a danger of saying, okay, let's get this key and test it, because the DNA that comes back, if anything comes back, may not point to Stephen Avery. However, you can't take that risk. However, if you're targeting Stephen Avery and you're saying, right, we're going to set Stephen Avery up for this, then what you do is you clean the key completely of any forensic evidence, and then you add the forensic evidence you want to be found, right? So this to me is a perfect example of law enforcement specifically targeting Stephen Avery. This in essence is like the picture that Jean Couché drew, right? It embedded in the mind of Penny Bernstein the image of Stephen Avery. Here is an example of a piece of forensic evidence belonging to Teresa, but only containing pure DNA from Stephen Avery. To me, if you're going to target someone, that's the way to do it. You have a pure sample.
It really, this is what, if you're going to say that, go down the theory that the cops planted this key, then the realistic scenario, the one you're describing there, Dr. Silkman, is that this was prepared in a lab. It was put in an evidence bag. It was handed to an officer. The officer unloaded the key from this evidence bag, said, hey, look at it, collected it, and put it right back in the same evidence bag.
Well, actually, you don't even need to do that. And I'll tell you why. You don't have to actually don't have to add any DNA to that key whatsoever. You control the result in the lab, right? So Culhane takes a swab, right? Throws away the swab, has a tube containing Stephen Avery's pure genomic DNA, amplifies it and says, oh, this result came from item C, the key. And that's it. That's how you do it. It's dry labbing. So you don't run the risk of setting up a piece of forensic evidence in the wild, per se. What you do is you manipulate the result in the lab. That's the way to do it.
Did Zelna get the key? She was handed the key, wasn't she? Was that one of the things?
Yes,
that
correct.
Okay, because I just considered that thought. Would her own team have tried to extract DNA from it as an independent source? Like, do you think?
There's no Cherie Cohen actually used up all the DNA from that swab of the key, so it can't be retested. And I haven't heard.
She tested herself. Couldn't she just get
I-
experts like swab it down now and kind of have a look? That's what we're about to see, new evidence. She's gone back to the thing and started swabbing for DNAs.
I haven't heard of anyone re-swabbing that key, but here's the problem: if genomic DNA was added to the key, then you're going to end up with the same result, right? What you wanted to have done is be the first person to have tested that key. Once that key, you got to understand, once forensic evidence has gone through the hands of a technician, then all bets are off. That's the problem. You need to have tested that forensic evidence in situ. You're the first person to test it. After it's already been tested, Lord knows what's happened to it.
But just out of curiosity, though, this is just curiosity theory I'm going to ask you, or just a question. She's got the key. I don't think she handed it back. I think she kept the key or whatever. Could her experts right now, whether you could use it in court because, like you said, chain of custody, whatever reason, but could she have got her own techs to swap the key and start trying to find a DNA analysis, like to see if it connected to anyone? What if they did it and they found Stevens again because, like you said, it was put there? But what if they then went, oh, hang on, we've got another one here. We've got, wasn't someone in court holding it without gloves?
No, everyone. I remember was Wiegert, and also Dean Strang. Buting. They had gloves on. Correct.
Okay, but imagine if they did it again now and found a little bit of Teresa on it, or hell, anyone's for that matter. Could that be still done now? Or
another profile, an unknown profile.
Yeah, like an unknown profile now.
Yeah, what you would do, because that key has returned back into evidence, right? So what I would personally do is get an MVAC and go over the entire key. So the MVAC's like a vacuum cleaner. So it will deeply go into the grooves of the fob, and if there's any DNA there, extract it. If that key belongs to Teresa Horbach, you do expect to find her DNA there, and potentially anybody else that's touched it. So yeah, potentially it could be reprocessed. Correct.
Thank you, Silkman. I was just wondering.
So along those same lines, Dr. Silkman, how difficult is it when you begin to get a mixture to dissociate the genomic profile of the perhaps potential multiple individuals from which you're getting the mixture? Is it kind of a guessing game? You kind of have to say, well, this person had this one and the other person had that one, so you kind of expect this. Is it exact? Yeah.
No, yeah. So essentially what you would do, it's all computer based, right? There's software that will sort out the alleles. So essentially you would need a DNA standard from your suspects, right? So in this case, you would have a DNA standard of Stephen Avery. We know his genomic DNA profile. We've also got the genomic DNA profile of Teresa Horbach. We know her allelic profile. So therefore, if you get a mixed profile, what a computer algorithm will do is sort out the alleles. So you will have common alleles that are shared between Stephen and Teresa. That can happen. You can have common alleles. Then you will have alleles which are unique to Stephen, unique to Teresa Horbach. Therefore, if you've got two or more profiles, you'll be able to sort them out into distinct matches. But normally, the more profiles you've got, the harder it will be to interpret. And furthermore, the big issue you have, the DNA levels must be the same, because say if two people had touched that key, the DNA levels may be altered. Someone who's frequently touching that key may have left the most DNA. So when you do a PCR and you run it out on a specific gel, the peaks that you get may be extremely high. From the other person who had touched that key, when you extract the DNA, the levels of DNA you may get can be quite low. But that's a computer that sorts that data out. It's not done by eye. So yeah, you can have powerful computer algorithms that sort out mixed profiles. Correct.
But it required the DNA sample. So for example, if the a third genomic profile were found on there and you wanted to put it through CODIS because you didn't know who it was, then you'd have a problem because you didn't know.
Huge problem.
You wouldn't know if there was any common ones. You wouldn't know how to.
Huge problem. And the thing is, right, if you don't have a complete genomic profile that you can put into CODIS, potentially you could be pulling out hundreds, if not thousands of matches, which is not going to do you any good. So a mixed profile is good if you can sort out the two genomic profiles, right? But if you can't, then potentially you're going to be left with a mess. It's going to be very difficult. But what we have here, Big Jeff, and as everybody knows, on that key, there's only one genomic DNA profile that was found, and that belonged to Stephen. So somehow he was such a good shedder, and despite being actively bleeding, he left no blood, but he scrubbed away all of Teresa's DNA from that key.
Some might think, well, our hands were tied. That you got a client who's saying that he's being framed publicly. That's kind of the defense you better go with, or you're contradicting your own client. But it really wasn't that way here. I mean, the defense was raised because we think the evidence pointed that way. Here's what we saw. The RAV4, the victim's RAV4, is found on the Avery salvage yard property. A ridiculous place to leave it if he was the killer. There's a crusher on the property. He knows how to use the crusher. He was operating the crusher the day before it was found. And yet this vehicle wasn't crushed. Why not? I mean, that's something that most killers don't have the opportunity to do. If you're a killer and you happen to run an auto salvage, you have a crusher. You can get rid of the victim's car. But he didn't. Second, his blood was found inside the vehicle, but only in a few areas, spots, so to speak. There was evidence that he had a cut on his finger, but what didn't make sense was that there was no fingerprints of Avery's at all in or on the vehicle. That would mean if Avery was the killer, he had to have had gloves. But if he's got gloves on, how could he be actively bleeding and leaving his blood behind? That was totally inconsistent. So it looked to us like maybe his argument that if my blood is in that vehicle, somebody planted it there. Maybe the evidence was pointing that way.
I was just going to say before we went any further, I just was going to say that is the ultimate question that everyone has always been in debate. That am I not wrong with that? Jerry just said it the way we've always said it to even guilters. You want us to believe he was bleeding, but he wasn't leaving fingerprints. So was he? They're all saying, well, he must have been wearing a glove. But if you're wearing a glove, you wouldn't be making blood impressions of blood drips. So which one is it? I just wanted to kind of hit that one first because it is the ultimate question or debate that we always have is, was he or was it he would have not been wearing gloves? Because if you go with one direction, you can't have the other side of it. You can't have your cake and eat it too. You can't be bleeding and wearing gloves at the same time, but not leaving fingerprints. It's Sukman.
Yeah, 100% correct. But there's just a couple of things, guys, that I want to point out. You know that even if Stephen Avery had crushed the car and left the crushed car on the property, it would have made no difference at all.
Thank you, Dr. Sukman.
Right now,
Why is that?
The reason for that is a cadaver dog or a scent dog will pick up the trail. And to prove that, every crushed car was actually opened up by the fire brigade, right? And so because you have distinguishing numbers like VIN numbers, it would only have been a matter of time before they discovered that that crushed vehicle was from Teresa's Toyota RAV4. When they brought in the cadaver dogs actually hit upon several vehicles in the salvage yard that had blood in them. Because remember, most of those vehicles that are collected are from accidents, and sometimes horrific injuries occur in those crash cars where the victims inside the vehicles bleed. The cadaver dogs picked up a couple of cars that had blood in them. So by crushing a vehicle, that's not going to eliminate the forensic evidence in that vehicle.
Sorry, Big Jeff, go.
The only problem I have with that argument is that the sequence of events here is the RAV is discovered, and its discovery is the discovery of the RAV that that prompts the police to seal off the property and do all the search warrants. If that RAV is crushed, Pam of God finds nothing, and there's no discovery and there's no search warrant. So how do they get the search warrant to get the cadaver dogs on the property in the first place?
Yeah, 100% correct. And that's proof positive. That's proof positive that if Stephen Avery had indeed been the killer, the very, very first thing he would have done was crush that RAV, right? And the stupid thing is, guys, that's exactly what he told Fassbender and Wiegert when he was arrested on November the 9th. He goes, I would have crushed that son of a bitch, or whatever he said, just mocking them by saying, am I going to leave the victim's vehicle in my own backyard, right? And the other important point is you can't just simply crush a vehicle like that, right? It's got a petrol tank. It's got a car battery. It's got a motor, right? Normally what happens is you need to strip a car before you crush it, right? And if you have a look at photographs that were taken on the salvage yard, there was a vehicle already in the crusher, right? There was already a vehicle in the crusher, which meant that Stephen would have had to have removed that car vehicle first, then put in the RAV4, and then crush it, right? So you're correct. The finding of the RAV is what set off the domino effect, right? So quite clearly, if Stephen Avery had committed this murder, there's no way he leaves the biggest clue on his own property intact.
I was just going to say, and I echo it quite a lot in a few discussions I have about this, you got to remember, although Stephen Avery did say I would have crushed it, the whole crushing of the vehicle and the location of where the vehicle was found was a part of the state's narrative. So for me, the crusher may not even play any part in it. For me, it was exactly what I think Big Jeff was alluding to. I think the location of where the RAV has nothing to do with the crusher itself. I think it was the location was because it was the easiest way of getting it in or putting it somewhere where they had a way to get out easier, or they had a directive of the way to get out. I think that was picked for that reason, and also because it needed to be found. That vehicle, like in the last episode when I went through it, that vehicle should have been the very first thing as the killer should have got rid of, besides Teresa. You can hide a body for so long before you then decide what you're going to do with it, but you've got to get rid of the one thing that's going to stand out, that people are looking for, that you can't just easily, burn or cut up. You have to either, like I said last time, throw in a body of water, bleach the shit out of it with even acid inside, like just absolutely destroy the inside for forensic evidence, or burn it. Now, the burning problem is any kind of fire brings attention. But again, would you burn it in a remote location and risk the fire getting called in and knowing that the evidence is destroyed? Of course you would. You would risk it for that few minutes just to know that, hey, by the time they do get it, it won't matter. At least I'm not in it anymore. That RAV needed to be found. And then you go backwards. Why did it need to be found? Well, if without it being found and by Pam of God, there was no need to get a search warrant. There was no reason. They would have eventually had to have dropped Stephen Avery from their line of inquirement, because at the end of the day, there was nothing pointing towards him. He was being cooperative. They let him have a sweep of his trailer. They were right up until the moment the RAV was found, an hour before. We have a phone call where Uyghur has put a narrative together where it goes, who was it? Who was the very first one? I've gone blank. Stephen, wasn't it? Who was the very first
one to do what?
To the first appointment that day? Oh my God, I cannot believe it.
Steve Schmidt.
Yeah, Steve Schmidt. So Steve Schmidt, then he put Avery's, and then he put Zipper's. So they were at that stage where if they didn't find it by the 5th or close to, you got to remember the 48-hour clock was still ticking at this stage. They were still in their time frame of the first 48. So voila, it gets found. The case then stops, and it stops at the salvage yard.
Correct. So
Who benefits from that? Not the killer. Not the killer. Because the killer, if the killer is someone on that property yard, holy shit, they're under the same scrutiny right now, because they're thinking, oh my God. And the other thing that I have a problem with the thought of the killer bringing it in, if the killer is someone on the salvage yard, you'd have to be next level kind of, stupid in a sense. You've got police coming to your property every day, the 3rd, the 4th. You've got flyovers happening. Why would you risk bringing it back into your own property and being caught red-handed? I then consider, did they maybe bring it in because they thought, okay, they've come, they've looked, they haven't found anything, now I'll bring it back because they won't look here anymore because they've already been here. It still doesn't eliminate the fact that, for all they knew, police were scouting at the front of the property watching for the next few days. Why would you risk playing around with that? So many dynamics and so many different variables come into play here, but I just wanted to touch base on that. The RAV had to be found. Without that RAV, Stephen, there was no case.
Right. Unless law enforcement were trying to come up with some type of reason or excuse to search that property. But at the end of the day, the RAV4 is the quintessential piece of forensic evidence that was ultimately used and proved Stephen's guilt, because that RAV4, A, belonged to the victim, and B, contains Stephen's own blood in that RAV. So what is bizarre here is that if you listen to the interrogation of Brendan Dassey, they asked him, what were you doing in Stephen's garage? Hey, I went over there and I helped him clean his garage floor. We got gas, bleach, paint thinner, and we cleaned the garage floor. Now, how bizarre is this? Say Stephen had committed this act, murder. He had the cleaning material to clean his garage floor, and yet it never entered his mind, I better give the RAV4 a once over with some gasoline or whatever, just to wipe away any prints or blood or anything present in that RAV. So he cleans his garage, but he leaves his own blood in the RAV4, even though he had the chemicals and the means to swipe down that RAV4, right? And so we know he never cleaned the RAV4 because there are 8 sets of prints on that RAV4 that don't belong to Brendan nor Stephen. We also know that at the back of the RAV4, you've got blood and a print, A23. That doesn't belong to Stephen nor Brendan. Otherwise, Culhane would have said it. So hence, guys, we've got a third genomic DNA profile on that RAV that doesn't belong to Stephen or Brendan. It can't be Teresa's. So therefore, no one cleaned down that RAV. Okay? And the problem is, as Jeff and Kelly have alluded to, you look at the distribution of those blood droplets in that RAV. Does that look like to you that someone is actively bleeding? No. Whereas if you look at his Pontiac Grand Dam, the blood droplets are very close together because the blood is constantly dripping from his cut. Drip, drip, drip. You don't find that in the RAV.
And they're where you'd expect them to be, right? Near the shifter. Yeah.
100% correct. And so Kratz came up with the theory that, maybe Stephen cut himself after dropping off the RAV to be dumped near the pit. So Kratz is moving the goalposts because he can't answer the hard questions. So he comes up with another speculative scenario to account for the blood in the RAV. The blood in the RAV doesn't make any sense.
I just have two quick questions for Dr. Silkman. One, does bleach destroy DNA?
There are different types of bleaches, apparently, but anything that's strongly alkali, strongly acidic, would what it basically does is it denatures the DNA molecule. So it will effectively destroy your DNA, correct?
And then the second question is, was the RAV ever sprayed with luminol?
I know that it was, that I don't know. I know that essentially what they did is they covered the RAV4 with fingerprint dust, and there's lots of photographs that show that it was covered with fingerprint powder. I don't know whether they actually sprayed luminol, but they most definitely took swabs from it. But luminol, I don't know whether luminol potentially could be destructive for the crime scene itself. But I tell you what, a luminol spray of that RAV4 would have been very, very interesting. But I don't know whether it had been sprayed with luminol.
So before we move on, it's worth it to discuss the picture that we're looking at right now. We do not have an in situ picture of that. You can tell from the seagull-looking nature of that picture and the bottom of each of the wings where they come together. You can tell where that blood was swabbed, right? People say, oh, well, that looks like it was applied with a Q-tip, and that I guess is from the swab. But we have no in situ picture from that. It could be that it was put on with a Q-tip. And the swab was done to cover up the bad artiste job of putting that blood on there in the first place. We just don't know. We don't have an in situ picture. The second thing is regarding that you often hear the guilders say, well, that's exactly where you'd expect the stains to be based on where Stephen's hand would be turning the key one way and the other. I haven't seen a model of that. As a matter of fact, if you rewound a few frames and look, that key ignition is actually angled back away. It almost looks like you're looking straight on it from because the steering wheel itself is in the way. But when you see the key ignition from the other angle looking into the passenger side window, you can see exactly how much that's actually angled. If you think about the ergonomic design of the ignition and kind of put your hand up there, you kind of see that your hand goes in on an angle. Stephen's not he's not that big of a guy. His hands aren't so I would like to see a model of his hand up and proof that that's exactly where his finger would land. If you have a cut on your finger and you're trying to protect it, you kind of bring your fingers in right away, right? Not out, and he's not. How is it that you think that blood ended up in that pattern? Right? I can see how if you're playing it. Yeah.
If Johnny Cochran was there, he'd be like, "No, I want to see someone put their hand in there and turn it and show me where this is rubbing." I think it's a really interesting I just say Johnny Cochran because he's like such a demonstrating type with the gloves, you know.
If it don't fit, you must have quit.
You gotta
The thing is, though, anyone could do this experiment, because at the end of the day, everyone could go to their car right now and just turn a key, and it's designed to have a distance. Never have I put the key in or taken a key out and hit that part of my car. All cars are like that. Unless you're
Exactly
deliberately
right.
doing it. Like, how many people go and hit that part? It's designed to not get caught, or, you know, in case of emergency, you've got to have a gap. If you need to get out of the car, whatever, you're not going to have a what would you call it, like a
the design. The
design
design
stopping
is
you from
in
doing
it's made so you
Ergonomics.
don't rub it. It's like it's an inlet right there, so you don't rub your hand. I mean, that's the whole point of how it's designed, right in
So
front of you.
the one problem I have with that, the drip. So remember, this isn't in situ pictures, and we haven't gone deep into the whole blood thing yet. But that first drip on the left, that is like a 90-degree angle, like someone has dripped it straight down. You're not going to get that unless he was hanging his finger over the top of it. The side swipe you would expect, but that first one on the left is an actual drop, a 90-degree drop down. That makes no logical sense for me, period. Because unless you're dangling your finger over it to do it, you should not be getting a 90-degree drop from that angle. It's low. It's fucking ridiculous.
We don't know what that is. We don't even know that that's it. With these pictures were taken. The photographer showed up after the. These were taken in the Wisconsin State Crime Lab, and the photographer showed up after the person who took the blood sample. Right. So we don't have an untainted picture, if you will, of what that blood stain looked like when they drove it in, quote unquote.
No, you're right, but that blood, what we see now, is from having Groffy had already presumptive tested it. So we're seeing the first residue of that.
Yeah.
That's why you can see a little bit of it like being diluted, where he's used the saline water on it just to lift it. So the problem that we have here is, though, you're still the whole idea, I think, for them to have put the blood there is just, again, you follow the narrative, you follow the story of what someone's trying to tell you. We have the Rav on the salvage yard, we have the key in his trailer. The blood is the connecting to all those other two elements of this case. Someone wanted to say, look, a Rav, look, a key, look, blood. And if you put them all together, it connects. It's just that obvious what the motive of it was. Why they put the blood there, for me, was connecting the key, which the key was then found in his trailer. That's how I see it.
Yep. Big Jeff is 100% correct. That's definitely not an in situ picture. The real bizarre thing is that Groffy came in on the Sunday morning, and his role was to take photographs. But what does he do instead? He does a presumptive test on that stain to confirm that it was blood, right? But to make matters worse, Culhane, the day after, swabbed it twice. She also did a presumptive test and then took another swab for DNA. So what you see there represents a blood swipe or whatever that's been swabbed 3 times. 3 times. So normally what you do with a Q-tip, you put your solution on the Q-tip, you touch the stain, and then you swipe it. And you can clearly see that the wings were due to the action of a Q-tip. So that's definitely not an in situ photo, right? So that means that blood there has been diluted with saline solution 3 times. And Big Jeff is correct. That indent is 2 inches, right? Because what Kathleen Zellner does in season 2, she actually puts a white sheet of paper in the exact same region. And she got someone who had blood on his finger hold the key and turn the ignition. No matter how many times they did it, no blood ever got on that spot, because you have to literally go 2 inches in. It's an indent, like Kelly and Big Jeff has said. However, what was interesting was that they got blood on the key, the steering wheel, and on the gear shift lever. You don't find any of that in the RAV4. So that's highly, highly suspicious. If Stephen is actively bleeding, he must be, if he's bleeding on that spot near the ignition switch. If he's actively bleeding and he's leaving droplets of blood there, then he must have had the key in his hand to turn the ignition. There's no blood on that key. There's none on the steering wheel. There's no blood even on the hood latch prop, which we'll talk about. So the whole scenario is extremely suspicious of that RAV4. It's way too clean for someone who's actively bleeding.
We've heard it since he was charged with murdering Teresa Halbach more than 6 months ago.
Stephen Avery and members of his family say police in Manitowoc County have it out for him.
The sheriff says the conspiracy theories are ridiculous.
Tonight we look into if framing is really a viable defense in this high-profile murder case. Fox 11's Lauren Cook has the final part of her series, The Averys, an inside look.
Avery's family believes police planted evidence in and around the salvage yard.
They're free to say what they want. Fact is, they have to prove it. And I don't think they could.
Sheriff Ken Peterson says his detectives worked
He
by
just
the
said it
book.
all.
He's been here 31 years and says he knows
He
the
absolutely
Averys and what he calls
just said it all.
Yep,
There
I
is
agree.
no test for planting. You just there. He knows that. He just was like, good luck trying to find it. Like, wow, what a pig.
And, to make matters worse, Buting asked Colhane about the blood in the RAV. And he asked her, he goes, well, are your tests able to tell the difference between Stephen actively bleeding in the RAV4 and someone planting that blood in the RAV4? And she said, no, which echoes exactly what Peterson just said. Oh, yeah, we did it. We set him up. You now prove it. And you're correct. There is no tests for planting.
calls Stephen's colorful past.
You say he'll kill again. Why do you say that?
I think that's his personality.
And Peterson says framing Stephen Avery would be much too difficult.
If we wanted to eliminate Steve, it would have been a whole lot easier to eliminate Steve than it would be to frame Steve.
But they did try to eliminate him.
Right.
Didn't they try to get back the death penalty for this case? If they were successful, Stephen would have been on death row.
Yep,
That,
100%.
to me, is elimination. That's just a very, very clever way of, not clever because it's disgusting, but that's just on their behalf. That is a clever way of eliminating him, prosecuting him, and then if he would have been executed, case would have been over. You never would have had making a murderer. You never would have had it. It's over, done. They were aiming for that.
But you see the creepiness of this. Instead of eliminating Steve by his hands, he got the state to do it via the electric chair or by lethal injection. So he's projecting what's in his mind. Yeah, we can't do it because we're law enforcement, but God damn it, we're going to put in a law that will. There you go.
So my point here is part of their argument is they're just trying to get us to believe that conspiracies don't happen. Well, we're only on episode 4. I encourage everybody to go back and rewatch episode 1 because as I said, the second that Brendan confessed, everybody's thinking about 1985 just went poof and disappeared because it was, and Len Kaczynski saying, oh yeah, well he was influenced by the most evil person of all times, basically saying all this is true. The fact of the matter is we witnessed one conspiracy in 1985 to frame Stephen for the horrific attack on Penny Bernstein. That was successful. We witnessed a second conspiracy in the whitewash of the investigation that basically ended up saying, well, nothing happened, and they colluded to not investigate what they needed to, and not dig deeply, and not report on all the stuff that they found. That is what you call a conspiracy, right? That is a second conspiracy. You could argue that the 1995 was a conspiracy when Peterson said, "Oh, we got the right guy," to keep him in prison. You could argue that we've already seen 3 conspiracies already, and you're telling us that conspiracies don't happen, and I shouldn't believe it just because conspiracies are too hard to pull off. What kind of a fucking idiot do you think we are? You know?
I think to make matters worse, right, isn't it interesting that for someone who's actually part of a conspiracy to cover up the truth, is actually telling people down the camera that conspiracies don't exist, they're too hard, even though he was part of one.
Exactly. It's ludicrous on its face.
That's like coming out of area. That's like someone from the military coming out of Area 51, looking down a camera and saying, "Aliens don't exist," while holding a baby alien in their hands. Exactly. Aliens don't exist. It's a conspiracy.
Well, and you know, the thing that I picked out of this is, what does eliminate mean, right? What he's like, we could have eliminated him if we wanted to. We didn't need to frame him. What does that mean, eliminate? Sounds like he's saying we could kill Stephen Avery. Tell me I'm crazy.
That's what he says on Dr. Phil. Says that exactly in the Dr. Phil show.
Kill him.
Kill him.
Extreme prejudice.
It would have been easier to kill him than to frame him. He uses that word.
Just like they say.
What? Whose murdering mind goes there?
Now you're going to have to pull up the Dr. Phil clip and put it in the episode.
The thing is, though, they say innocent people don't confess. They use that as a thing that they were going through with Brendan. Yet we have hundreds of cases where wrongful convictions are based on wrongful confessions. So, you know, and then this idea of conspiracy, there is no conspiracies here, they don't exist, rah, rah, rah. Case studies around the world show they absolutely do exist, and the connecting factor in all of them is when you do have like tampering or some kind of conspiracy of a setup in a crime, guess who is behind it? Law enforcement. I've been doing like statistics on this and trying to capture all the data of all this for months, just siphoning through all the wrongful cases around the world and trying to find like the most leading sources of why people were going to jail and what was the main cause. Was it wrongful conviction? Was it false misidentification? Was it, and law enforcement, every single one that comes up where there's misconduct or tampering, police are behind it. It's either an actual officer themselves that have a lot of the cases. They're adding like a drug source, but when there is cases around the world where like forensic evidence, like of a blood source, has been tampered with or planted, and it's either one law enforcement officer or lab technician. So it does happen.
Not only that, we've actually got proof of it when Fassbender rang up Culhane, right, and asked her, try to put her in his garage or trailer. Now, think about it, guys. This is the lead investigator ringing up the lead forensic DNA tech who collated all the who did all the swabbing herself, so she knows exactly where all the swabs come from. And you have Tom Fassbender requesting the lab tech try to put her in his trailer or garage. Now, tell me, guys, does that sound like an unbiased investigation to you?
No, and a matter of fact, it points to one of the exact reforms that needs to happen. In order to make this kind of stuff fair for people, the crime labs need to operate in a blind way, right? They need to have to be requested to do tests and not be instructed what the outcome of those tests need to be. Right? That needs to stop, and they need to handle things very blindly in order for true reform to happen.
Correct. All the for a start, Culhane should have been nowhere near that forensic evidence because of a long association with Stephen Avery. Don't be under no illusion. Culhane is a state player, right? She's employed in the Wisconsin State Crime Lab under the auspices of the Attorney General's office. Okay, she's a state player. All the collected forensic evidence should have been double-blind tested by an independent laboratory. That way, you can't manipulate the outcomes that Culhane could have easily done in the privacy of her own lab.
I recall we did a video a long time ago, Dr. Silk, when you and I got called a stooge for the state. They should look it up.
Oh, yeah.
Foul Play website. Zoe did some great artistry on the cover. They're the greatest video icon of all times, I think, for that.
Correct. That was the classic. Thank you, Big Jeff.
That just to come back to what Sheriff Peterson said, I'm still kind of like in awe of it. That he said he could eliminate Stephen. And I think, what if the media portrayed his statements how they were portraying Stephen Avery's statements and said, tonight on Fox 11, Sheriff Peterson says he could have eliminated Stephen at any time he wanted, right? What if things like that happen? It just shows you how easy it is to pull statements out of stuff. But he did say this, that he could eliminate Stephen Avery, meaning just get rid of him. And there are people that believe law enforcement is responsible for Teresa Halbach's death. And statements like this from Sheriff Peterson, not some wackadoodle YouTuber, but Sheriff Peterson saying that he could eliminate someone if he wanted to. It grants credence to those people. And that's why I'm so like this statements like this drive me up the wall.
But it also demonstrates the utter hatred that law enforcement had for Stephen. They never apologized to him for what happened in 1985, and they never will. So this was very much the attitude of law enforcement. And don't forget, it was Peterson's office that sent out a memo to everyone in his office: do not discuss the exoneration of Stephen Avery. So he put a gag order. And the other thing, of course, was Sheriff Peterson also told Deborah Kakich, you step foot on the salvage yard, I'm going to arrest you. Right? So remember, he's one of the old boys. He was one of the arresting officers, correct me if I'm wrong, that arrested Stephen in 1985, along with Mike Bushman. Right? So these guys have had a long history with Stephen.
Right, and Deb Katich was the coroner. Right, so let's not leave people hanging who she was. And she was also the coroner. She also investigated the Ricky Hochstetler getting hit by a vehicle. There was a very strong suspicion that he was hit by a police car. And
Correct.
She had said, and that happened, I think, in the January timeframe. So not a reasonable amount of time within the same year. And she said, if I figure out it's one of you guys, I'm not going to be shy about putting you away. And that permanently, put her at odds with the Manitowoc police for that exact reason.
Yep. And if I could just make the point, Deborah Kakich had the #1 power to arrest the sheriff as coroner, right? So you could imagine what would have happened if she went onto the salvage site and said, guys, this doesn't look right, and actually had the power to arrest Sheriff Peterson, all hell would have broken loose. So he took the first step by saying, you step foot on the property, you're arrested. But we'll talk about that at another time.
I eliminate.
If we wanted him out of the picture, like in prison, or if you wanted him killed, it'd be much easier just to kill him.
In the meantime,
This
Jesse
is
is
insane.
keeping up on his schedule.
This is
We have
absolutely
delivered
insane.
him from Michigan High School. He's in a juvenile detention center in Sheboygan. Brooke and Tom.
Lauren, thank you very much. Still ahead for us tonight.
Where do you start with digging through the levels of insanity of this?
Yeah.
It's Fascinating.
I need to know the truth.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Well, you know, I'm telling you the truth that it's not true.
Then why say it?
That was when they came up here, remember?
Yeah, on a Saturday.
Yeah. And they said that they knew already what happened, that they wanted me to, they just wanted it coming out of my mouth.
Brendan, you don't just come up with something like that if something like that didn't happen. Or is it true that he did kill her?
Not that I know of, I told you. He might have, but not with me.
So you're honestly telling me the truth?
Yeah.
You didn't have nothing to do with this?
No,
Don't lie to me, Brendan.
I ain't.
But what I can't figure out is why you said all this shit, if it's not true, and how you came up with it.
Guessing,
What do you mean, guessing?
I guess.
You don't guess with something like that, Brendan.
Well, that's what I do with my homework, too.
Yeah, I know.
Well,
This is what put... No, the statement you made is what puts you in there.
Yeah.
You know, just quickly, Big Jeff, I see you shaking your head and you're like, you can't believe it, like what he just said. But this is what I brought up last week on the podcast, where O'Kelly took a very education-based standpoint around it, and I think I made the point where it's like this classroom setting, and he's feeding them answers like it's a question on a test. And no, that's not right, Brendan. No, okay, I'll try answer B then, and B isn't right. Okay, C then, and this is what he's referring to, being force fed these, just like I do at school, and I think it really rings true to me.
To me, that what gets me upset is the fact that Brendan himself is still a little befuddled about what happened to him. He says to his mother, "I was only guessing," when in reality, what he was doing was feeding back what they were telling him in the first place, which is much different than guessing, right? They're telling me what to say, and maybe they told me, an hour ago or 20 minutes ago, but I'm repeating back to what they said. What they said. I'm not even really sure that he realizes that they fed him all the answers beforehand, and you have to kind of sit down with a pencil and paper and see who mentions what first to be able to do that. So just the lack of awareness that he has about the about the situation, and he's unfortunately handicapped from that perspective individual. I'm not trying to make fun of him, but just even that interaction just shows just his level of self-awareness as to what's going on around him. It's unfortunate and angering, which is why I had that reaction.
That I'm 100% agreed, Big Jeff. Brendan Dassey had no idea he was being manipulated in the way he was. After all the events had taken place and he had time to reflect, he still had no idea what transpired, right? And you could clearly see the way Brendan is telling his mother, because look, if this murder took place, it wasn't when I was there, which is really eerie, because that's what Stephen said to Barb in a phone call too, saying, well, if she got murdered, it wasn't when I was there. So now you've got two different people, Brendan and Stephen, both saying, hey, if she was murdered, I wasn't there. And again, what Brendan echoed is so true, because he kept on saying, well, they already know. They already know. Brendan got convinced, in my opinion, that Stephen had murdered Teresa. Brendan couldn't work it out because it didn't happen while he was there. So he's getting back to the fact that, hey, I just made things up. But remember the film Kiss the Girls. A lot of the stuff that he said to Fassbender and Wiggett came directly from that film, which he definitely did see.
And now you're going to have to get... So, everybody out there, you'll have to get them to... you're gonna go to prison.
Yeah.
Yeah. For the rest of your life. For something that's not even true.
Yeah.
Is that what you wanted?
No.
Well, how are you gonna turn everything around now?
I don't know.
Well, you better start putting your head on your shoulders and start thinking.
How can I? I'm really stupid, Mom. I can't help it.
Why do you agree to everything then?
Because I'm stupid, I told you.
You're not stupid to me.
Yeah, I am.
No, you're not.
For me, it's really, really hard. I want to drink all the time. It's confusing, it's frustrating, because there's not much I can do to prove that he didn't do it or that Brendan didn't do it. And I want to do, and get them out so that they can prove they didn't do it. But just nerve-wracking. It was nice to be down here alone because I could think. And I had a couple of beers and just maybe not so I wasn't so angry. If I'm caught, I'd go to jail.
So admitted on television. What a great idea, Jody.
They told me get a job and move. I moved and got a job. I'm doing everything they told me to. My lawyer was supposed to talk to my probation officer on Monday about having this no contact lifted. I just think they're doing it thinking that, well, I'll get sick of it and just leave him for my own, I don't know. It'd be better for me if I didn't talk to him and got him out of my life. That's what I think they think. But it ain't gonna happen.
The fact of the matter is, you only need to listen to the jail calls around this time frame to understand that that Jody's stay at the Averys was not going very well. She was really getting on Dolores's nerves, and she was getting on Alan's nerves, and they didn't feel like she was doing her part around the house, and there's a whole bunch. As a matter of fact, they showed her in the trailer. The trailer was messed up so bad that it didn't even have running water anymore. So literally, if you need to use the restroom, you need to go outside or go in a bucket. For those of you who actually listen to the call, Steven says that she should move out of Dolores's and move back to the trailer, and she can go in a bucket. That's what it got that bad. And Jody didn't really have another place to live, right? Didn't have a job. So in a lot of ways, what the parole officers recommended was good for her. It was not a good situation, and you need to live in a place that has running water. So get a job and get a real place. But that's not to say that it wasn't nefarious as well to try and push her apart from Steven, because that was giving Steven comfort. And whenever Steven got into a bad way was when he started to, in their mind, admit more and more in the phone calls that was of potential evidentiary values, when he'd fight with his family and things like that. They did everything they could to rattle him, to try to elicit him to say things that they would find evidentiary.
Yep, 100% correct. This is all planned. It's all targeted. It's all part of deconstructing Stephen Avery. So in essence, what they're doing is they're taking away everything that he loves and wants. Because you remember some of the phone calls where he says, look, I want to marry you, I want to get away from Wisconsin, etc., etc. However, removing his fiance from the scene, and you're correct, Big Jeff, there was a lot of tension between the family and also with Jody. And I remember there were calls in which Stephen was very upset with his brother Chuck, who was either giving Jody alcohol or cigarettes or both. And so that just started causing arguments within the family. So it ended up being a horrible shit show for Stephen and his family, of course.
Anything that's do with me, they do. I don't see how they could keep me from Jody. That's just this detective, though, going to a probation officer and telling her what to do. And that shouldn't be. That's just another thing that got control. You know, I don't want to lose Jody.
I just keep thinking, so wish I could talk to him. Just tell him I love him. See, I'm still here. I ain't going nowhere.
I think I got it. I mean, this one. Yeah. 1982. Right there. I remember him. And him.
Gene Fouché. That's conservative, actually. Take it back.
Here he is. Kenny Peterson. I didn't like the statement he made either. That's a hell of a thing for a sheriff to say. You said that right on TV.
Defense calls Sheriff Kenneth Peterson. In 1985, you were requested by the then sheriff of Manitowoc County, Tom Kasorik, to arrest Mr. Avery on a charge of attempted murder.
Yes.
And that involved a violent assault on a beach here in Manitowoc County.
Correct.
Later, the claim that Mr. Avery had made that he was innocent of those crimes proved to be true.
Possibly.
I'm sorry?
I would have doubt.
You have doubts about that?
Yes.
Yep. This is it. In a nutshell, you've got it right there. He has doubts. That's exactly the same position that Couchet took. So despite 16 alibi witnesses, despite being exonerated by Gregory Allen's pubic hair found on the pubic hair region of Penny Bernstein, you now have a senior law enforcement officer having doubts, still having doubts on Stephen Avery's innocence or guilt on the attack of Penny Bernstein, right? So in a nutshell, here's a law enforcement officer admitting on national television that would have been easier to eliminate Steve by killing him, and now expressing doubt of his innocence, right? Despite DNA evidence. Isn't that interesting?
Let's not forget a de facto confession from Gregory Allen himself that caused the Brown County officer to call and say, hey, you know, there's somebody in jail for one I did. You know, the assailant himself.
That's correct. And despite all of that being concrete proof, positive evidence of Stephen Avery's innocence, have a look at the look on his face. He still, I don't know what planet these guys are from, but they cannot admit that they've made a mistake. They have to justify the bullshit that went on, and they're still doing it today.
I just want to make the point that they don't believe the DNA evidence in 1985, but yet would call us crazy to question the DNA evidence in 2005.
Correct.
Assault on a beach here in Manitowoc County.
Correct.
Later, the claim that Mr. Avery had made that he was innocent of those crimes proved to be true.
Possibly.
I'm sorry?
I would have doubt.
You have doubts about that?
Yes.
I want to be clear. One of the reasons you disengaged personally from the Halbach investigation is that you personally had sat for a deposition in Stephen Avery's civil claim against Manitowoc County.
No, I don't think it had anything to do with that decision, no.
Let's break this down. You had your deposition taken on October 13, 2005. Does that sound right?
It's possible.
About 2.5, 3 weeks before Ms. Halbach disappeared?
Somewhere in that time frame.
And the other two members of your department who had their depositions taken about the same time were Lieutenant Lank and Sergeant Andrew Colborn, correct?
I don't know. I don't know who gave depositions.
Who wants to call BS on that?
Well, sorry, Big Jeff. I was going to say this is the unity that law enforcement officers have with each other, right? This is the unity, the thin blue line. No way is he going to give any points to what Strang is asking him. So he's in a state of denial, and he would never, ever admit that him or his department did anything wrong or nefarious. Because if they do that, they'll open the door to criticism, right? So he's just playing dumb. He didn't even are you trying to tell me that he didn't even realize when two of his own officers, Lincoln Colburn, were called up for depositions? Oh, really, Mr. Peterson?
And Jean Couchet.
Correct.
You don't disagree that they both sat for depositions in that lawsuit in mid-October 2005? You just don't know?
As I recall, that had something to do with some information that came somewhere in the late 90s.
Mid-1990s, that's right.
Yeah, but I don't know when they were deposed. I wouldn't have a clue.
In your life, have you ever spent a day or a night in jail for a crime you didn't commit?
No.
If you were in Stephen Avery's chair and you were in his shoes, so to speak, would you trust the Manitowoc County Sheriff's Department in the investigation and prosecution of yourself a second time?
Objection, speculation.
I'm not asking you to speculate at all. I'm
relevance then.
I'm going to sustain the objection. Any further questions?
No.
All right, the witness is excused.
And of course, we mustn't forget who also was deposed, right, Big Jeff?
Deb Strauss.
Yeah, and also Tom Fallon.
Tom Fallon.
The one that came up with the objection. The one that came up with the objection for Peterson to answer.
Your Honor, we will not find another case in which the sheriff opines not just that the defendant is guilty of the charged offense, but opines that if he's acquitted somehow, he'll murder someone else in the future. On what possible basis? I have no idea. This was really remarkable. Before we even get to the bizarre discussion of how it might have been easier to kill Stephen Avery than to frame him. Off the charts.
Well, with regard to the ruling, it's actually kind of stunning that he sees fit to exclude them from the trial, but doesn't see any problem with the level of involvement they had in the evidence collection. how are those two things, copacetic in the same universe? They're simply not. The bulk of the forensic evidence was found by Manitowoc officers, starting with the key, and then the bones, very strangely, we're going to find out there's a piece of evidence called item FL that Manitowoc was strangely around when they found that too. But despite that, they can't be at the trial, but everything they did before, no problem, because it was just a supporter.
Yeah, if I could just add on that, that's 100% correct, and a brilliant comment, because the horse is already bolted. If Judge Willis was actually serious, especially after hearing those comments from Peterson, what he should have done was actually ban the submission of any evidence, anything found by MTSO officers, right? But then he would have had to have looked at Cherie Culhane, right? Who's the state's forensic DNA expert, who also had a very long history with Stephen Avery handling all the forensic evidence. So imagine if he slapped, "I'm sorry, anything you touched is inadmissible. I want all the forensic evidence re-examined in an independent laboratory in a double-blind manner." Oh boy, now that would have put the cat amongst the pigeons. But as Big Jeff alluded to, it's poison. It's fruit from the poison tree. The horse is already bolted, guys. It's not going to change the outcome.
The point that I would make about the trial being held in Calumet County, I don't think it really makes a difference one way or the other. Maybe in terms of, appearance, but Calumet County, it's not like you're going to get a special jury pool. I mean, she was from Calumet County. Teresa Halbach's from Calumet County. So it's not like you're going to get people sympathetic to her. You know what I'm saying? Like, I don't understand.
They took the jury pool from Manitowoc. And that was at Stephen's request. I mean, I'm not sure that was the smartest move that Stephen ever made, but Stephen felt that the people of Manitowoc would understand how the cops were in Manitowoc. And he would get sympathy but because of that. I don't think he was correct, but it was his decision, and the jury pool was from Manitowoc.
I think it wouldn't have made a difference. I guess my point is, even if it came from Calumet County, I don't think he was going to get any special treatment either way or the other, I guess is my point. Cal, do you have any comments?
I don't think it should have. I think straight away that any Manitowoc officer that found any evidence should have been squashed immediately anyway. I think that was the whole point. If they weren't going to have a coroner there because they reckon that was a conflict of interest, how does it not work for the Manitowoc officers? It is such a hypocritical thing. It does my head in, to be quite honest.
Fair enough. Well, with that said, you guys, just because we didn't get through as much on this episode as we usually do, we will have to complete this episode of Ma'am next week. And so again, thank you guys for coming, and thanks everybody out there for listening. Like and subscribe and do all that kind of stuff. And this has been Discussing a Murder.